Woman, be who you are. You can be who you are. With Christ in your heart, you'll set the world on fire. Woman, there's no greater power than he who's working in you. Woman.
Hello and welcome to the program. This is Woman, a show about strong women of faith living lives of authentic beauty. I'm Lisa Mladinich and I'm your host. And today's topic is finding beauty in suffering. And in a few moments, we'll be joined by our very special guest, Mary Ellen Barrett. But first, let's meet the panel. Here we have on my left, Andrea Vasquez is a speaker and a former missionary who has worked in Asia, North America, and South America. She is currently a program coordinator here at Shalom World Media. Welcome, Andrea.
Thank you so much, Lisa. It's very exciting to be here. And to my left, I want to introduce Christie Young. Christie Young is the Associate Director for Christ the King Passionate Retreat Center. Christie is also a talented singer, songwriter, speaker, and she's also responsible for our program theme song. So that's really exciting to have her here, a lot of talent with us.
Thank you, Andrea, Lisa. I'm so excited to be here. I can't wait. I think we've got a really neat topic today that we're going to dive into. For those of you who don't already know Lisa Mladinich, she is an amazing author of the best-selling book, True Radiance, Finding Grace in the Second Half of Life. She's also a frequent contributor to Relevant Radio. She speaks at events across the country and also is the founder of AmazingCatechist.com. So you can find more of her work there.
Yes.
All right, well, let's get on to introducing our wonderful guest. Mary Ellen Barrett is a home-educating mother of 8 children who speaks at events around the country on topics related to homeschooling, Catholic family life, marriage, and bereavement. She is a columnist for the Long Island Catholic and a contributor to Seton Homeschool magazine. Mary Ellen serves on the board of directors for Seton Home Study School and the Immaculate Heart of Mary conferences. Her writing can be found on Catholic Exchange, Catholic Digest, Amazing Catechists, and many other websites and periodicals. Mary Ellen lives with her husband of 23 years, their brood of children, and a large, unruly dog in New York. She can be found blogging at maryellenbarrett.com. Welcome, Mary Ellen.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
Well, we're so grateful that you're here to talk about the beauty of suffering, especially from the perspective of a mother who has lost a child. Your son, Ryan, passed away in 2009, and he was a very special kid. He was special within your family, within your parish, and your homeschool community. Would you tell us just a little bit about his life and the impact that he had on other people?
Sure. Ryan was my first. He would be 21 now. He's always on our mind, but he's very much on our mind this week. He was diagnosed with autism at 3 years old. Back then, you had to miss a certain amount of milestones before you were diagnosed with autism. I'm not sure if that's still the same case now. And he just had this great love of music and the Mass. And he had perfect pitch, so he could play his guitar. He was 2 years old, and he was playing Sesame Street songs on his guitar. Blew us away. We had no idea where this came from. We had the little tiny kid guitar. And eventually he ended up taking lessons, but pretty quickly surpassed his teacher in that he had a perfect ear. He never really learned the notes, but he learned how to play. And all he wanted to do was be a Franciscan friar and play for Mass. That's all he wanted to do. And when he passed away, he was 14. A funny thing, when he was about 8 or 9, he just started praying the Divine Mercy Chaplet at 3:00. He couldn't tell time yet. He was, his IQ was kind of borderline. And so he didn't know a lot of stuff, and it's not a devotion of mine, but he saw it on EWTN. And at 3:00, like clockwork, he'd walk outside in the yard and just with his beads and walk around the yard and pray the Divine Mercy Chaplet. And because I'm just a wonderful mother, I would say, stop praying and go play outside like normal boys. When they write a saint story, I'm not going to come off so well. And then 7 years ago, yesterday, he passed away. He was on a camping trip with his dad, and it was a bunch of the local dads got together every year and took their sons on a camping trip. They would sometimes bring a friar with them, or sometimes they would just bring their breviaries. So it was kind of spiritual and also, manly boy, nobody showers or anything like that kind of weekend. Gross stuff. And Ryan just loved this trip. He looked forward to it every year. And he had epilepsy, which is common with autistic people. And he had been seizure free for a long, long time. And we had been slowly weaning him off his medicine. And what happened was he was sitting at a creek. He was waiting to be called for evening prayer. And he had his juice and he had his little thing of Cheetos. And apparently he had a grand mal seizure and slipped into a creek and drowned and was missing for, it was probably 18 hours before the divers found him. So in that time, a friend drove me up to the campsite with my youngest at the time was 8 months old, and I was there when they found him. So I was able to be there. 2 priests met in the middle of the woods. We were praying, and 2 priests came, and so he received last rites. He was already gone, but that meant a lot to me, and so it was an awful, awful thing. Horrible thing to lose a child and to lose so unexpectedly like that.
So after a shock like that, Mary Ellen, I've often said to God, there's only so much you can take from me before I'm going to fall apart. What was your conversation like with God, and how did you begin to find, in the midst of that incredible upheaval, that devastating loss, how did you start to perceive the beauty in the suffering that you and your family were experiencing?
Because Ryan was so close to God, I think he must have prayed for me the minute he hit heaven. Because, of course, I was devastated, and my husband was devastated, and I couldn't even think straight. It's like a physical pain when you lose a child, probably when you lose anybody. But, this was just the most intense experience. And I kept saying to my husband, please just make the pain stop. Please just get this knife out of my chest. I couldn't breathe. I hurt so much. But I never blamed God. I was never angry because I always knew that Ryan, I don't know, he had another purpose. He was a little otherworldly in that way. And I was so grateful that he was home where he belonged and where he could be happy and where he wasn't weird or where I didn't have to worry about how people would treat him or how he was going to be later on in life and who was going to take care of him and make sure he was cared for. That was such a great relief, but I missed him so much. And I think he was praying for me and he got me through that. And so many people around the world were praying for us because of social media and Facebook and my blog and all the writing I had done about special needs and these kinds of children and about Ryan particularly. The grace that came from all of those prayers was absolutely incredible, Lisa. It was magnificent. And Dave and I both felt cared for in a way that only our Blessed Mother and our Father in heaven could care for us, and the way that Ryan prayed for us. You really kind of unite yourself with the cross, and you say, okay, I'm suffering, it's awful, this has to be towards some purpose, and just at some point I hope to know this purpose, that my son is cared for, and that's the most important thing tonight.
Mary Ellen, you've spoken a lot publicly about the bereavement of your family over this. And could you explain to our listeners, how do you unite your suffering with Christ? What is that about?
If you've ever seen The Passion of the Christ, when the Blessed Mother is kneeling at the cross, it gives you such a good visual because it's really hard to picture that. So I always try to take that visual to mind. And I knelt at my son's body there. And I felt that kind of pain, although nobody, of course, beat him up or hurt him or anything. But I kind of say, if the Blessed Mother could live through this and do what was asked of her, then she is a role model for me. And I really have to say, God, this suffering is not wasted. Nothing I've suffered, nothing my children have suffered, nothing my husband or our parents, the grandparents or their cousins is wasted. And there's purpose in this. I can't imagine going through this without the beauty and the comfort of my Catholic faith. Because I know God is taking this suffering and he's going to do amazing things with it. If for nothing else, for my soul. And hopefully when I think to, and I'm not always so good about this, when I think to offer it up for different things, hopefully other people are changed too and transformed. So when you really just picture that moment at the cross, kneeling at the cross, and you try to picture yourself there, it really does give you a sense of peace and purpose that I don't think you could get if you didn't have this to rely on, that God has a plan. And if I just go along with the plan, whenever we go along with God's plan and stop trying to impose our plan on it, it just work out better in my life. And I know they probably do in other people's lives. So I try to say, all right, you have a plan and I'm going to trust you. I don't understand and I hurt. Please comfort me and help me to understand this. And I really, really have to believe that this is going to benefit me, my children, and my husband, and everybody who knew Ryan and prayed for him. I really believe that in my heart. It's such an awful thing to lose a child, and you can feel very lonely about that, because it's not very common. Most people expect to lose their parents at some point, and it's an awful thought, but to lose a spouse is not unheard of. But to bury a child is just an awful thing. So when you have that happen to you, it's a very lonely feeling. So whenever I can help somebody reach out and say, no, you're not alone, and this is, you're feeling angry or upset or devastated, that's completely normal, and it's the way I felt. Whenever I can help somebody, I'm happy to do that.
I loved how you said that nothing goes wasted. Nothing is wasted when, our world, people don't know how to suffer, if that makes sense. Us as Catholics, we have the opportunity to look at a cross and see that the cross means so much more. It means redemption. It means that our suffering is not wasted, like you said. Every drop of Christ's blood that was shed was for our sanctification, for our salvation. And in that same way, how beautiful, like Christie said, to be able to unite your suffering to Mary in that way, which is something very feminine as well, because, you can relate to our mother, and I'm sure that Holy Saturday takes on a whole new dimension for you.
It does. It really, really does. And we have so many beautiful examples in our faith of women who have suffered. Saint Bernadette and just so many women who have suffered and just believed it made them holier, or believed that it was God's way of purifying them. And who knows, this might be my shot to heaven.
Well, I'm sure.
Pray for me.
Yes, definitely.
My only way.
Definitely.
When people responded to the tragedy, what did that feel like to be on the receiving end? Because I know moms just give and give and give and give, and now suddenly had to be on the other side of that.
It was so extraordinary. When we were planning Ryan's funeral, my husband's in the Knights of Columbus, and we're very active in our parish. And so we went to the local funeral home, and the gentleman who works there is in the Knights as well. And he said to us, you're going to need the big room, and you're going to need 2 nights. And we just thought, it's going to be a small family funeral. And he said, no, I really think, it's better to have more space than not. And all right, whatever. We really, you could have told us anything. We had 1,000 people come to his wake, 1,000 people for my weird little autistic son. And then his funeral was packed. I mean, we have a big, big church, and it was filled with just the homeschoolers and people we worked with, and just people in the community. And so many people would come up to me and say, I loved watching your son sing at Mass. And your son just came up and gave me a hug after we sang at Mass. And every music ministry participated. So we had the Life Teen Band, and we had the adult choir and the children's choir, and a bunch of music ministers came back. And then we had a wonderful young woman who was homeschooled, who's now singing for the Metropolitan Opera, sang. We had 12 priests and a bishop presided as Mass, because the bishop read in the paper that Ryan wanted to be a priest, and all priests have a bishop at their funeral Mass. He's still part of us. He's just, I wish he were here part of us. I haven't quite given in to the fact that I want to hug my son again, but it doesn't get better. No, it just, you learn to live with it.
We'll be back in just a few minutes. Join Christie and I on our street segment.
Woman, be who you are. Woman, be who you are. You can be who you are. With Christ in your
here at the cemetery, and one thing that we can be certain of is that we will pass and that we will all suffer. Isn't it amazing how since the beginning of time, everyone has been like wondering why man has to suffer and why man actually has to die?
Yeah, but I think that I laugh a little when you say, that there's one thing that's for certain, and that's suffering, because I think that there's so much joy too to be had in life. And the reality is, suffering is a part of that. And I forget where I heard it said, but one person's explanation of like why we suffer is because, when we have bad times, we realize how good the good times are, and we learn to treasure those things. So I think it's always important to see the complementarity of what is good and brings us joy, and then the things that are harder, and then how do we cope with that stuff.
Right, and I think it's important to remember that Mary, for example, took something, and Christ himself took something that is so painful to us, because sure, we can say that suffering teaches us, but more often than not, suffering can become unbearable. A few weeks ago, I had 2 deaths in close to our family in one day. I could not help it I was on my way to McDonald's and sobbed through the line at McDonald's. I knew this woman had been a great woman, had done great things for my family, but I could not help it to be sad that she wasn't here. I think that for us as Christians and as Catholics, the important thing, like you said, is to remember that in every difficulty there will be better times, but to remember more than anything that transcendent meaning that suffering will end, and at the end there's heaven, and that Mary and Jesus saw suffering and used suffering for something so tremendous as our salvation.
And I think that's really the key, is how to use suffering. We hear this idea of unite your suffering to Jesus on the cross, and it's like, okay, but that doesn't take it away from me. And I think we have to understand, that's not always the goal. The goal is not always to just not suffer. And I think the suffering that we can't alleviate, the kind of pains that don't go away, those are the things that are important to say, okay, this is something that I'm living with now. How can I do something with it?
Right.
And then looking to, Mary, a sword shall pierce your heart. Like, she couldn't help what was going to happen to Jesus, and she had to learn how to live through that and use that for good.
Welcome back. We're talking about finding the beauty in suffering.
Mary Ellen, I'm wondering, so many times when we encounter people who have suffered a loss or are going through something traumatic, we don't know what to say. We don't know what to do. And there is that temptation to say, oh, time makes things better, because that's what we hear so often. What, in your experience, is the best thing for somebody trying to accompany somebody else through a grief or through a trauma? How can we better be there? How can we be present to people going through that?
That's such a great question, and I get asked that all the time. A couple of things. First, you don't have to say anything particularly profound. Just, I'm sorry, I love you, I'm praying for you is really enough. And you should go to the wake and go to the funeral. And it's hard, and it's not the best thing to have to do. But people so appreciate when you do that, just that presence there. Write a little card, show up at something, send a meal. Those things mean the world. And another thing that we found was so healing and helpful, these little memorials, like when people do things, his baseball team dedicated a bench on the field to him, so it's got his name on him. So many people have made rosaries for us and prayer shawls, and just sent us these little things. Or a couple of people sent me pictures that I didn't know were out there. Or one lady wrote me a letter about an encounter she had with Ryan at church, and he cheered her up on a day she was feeling down. And that just meant the world to me, that people took the time to do these little things. So if you know somebody who's suffering, really, I'm sorry, I love you. And then a few weeks later, call them up and say, I'm going to bring you dinner, or I'm going to take you out, or I'm going to take the kids and give you a day to yourself, or, even like a gift card for a manicure or something like that, just to get them out and about and realize that life has to go on a little bit. Just a little free time like that can mean a lot. But just always, I'm sorry is always just the best thing.
Mary Helen, I have one question for you, and it's, what advice would you give to mothers who are suffering? Because I think that you've touched suffering in a way that a lot of mothers have not had the opportunity to touch it. And I once heard, suffering makes you more human. And I truly believe that. I truly believe that you have the capacity to empathize with someone much better than I do, perhaps.
And my advice to any mom who's suffering, and suffering doesn't have to be a loss. Like you said, it can be somebody living in a way inconsistent with our faith or our values. I really try to, my first instinct for that now is prayer, my rosary. I'm such a rosary girl. I just say my rosary with great faith. I'm not the most meditative person in the world, but I just have faith that my rosary changes things. A little bit of fasting is always a good thing. I do that when I can. I try to reserve that for Wednesdays to fast a bit for people, for conversion of sinners. So I know a lot of people have had a great deal of success in changing hearts with just fasting for their children. And it can be a fast from food or from, wine, which is horrible, but TV, whatever it is. And don't lose faith, because if you've given your children a good grounding in the faith and you're constantly receiving the sacraments yourself, God is going to change things for the better. He doesn't want to lose any of our children. He wants them all with him in heaven. So if you give him the opportunity to work through you, it will happen. It may not happen in our time, and that suffering is just going to go to everybody's good. But hang on, because don't lose faith. It does happen. I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen to my own family. I've seen it happen all the time. God changes hearts. We just have to trust him. It's a beautiful thing, and everybody has their own favorite devotion. So like all those young mothers with babies who can't get out to Eucharistic devotion, well, there are ladies like you who can and who do that, and they're staying home praying their rosary or their Divine Mercy Chaplet, or people who can get to confession every week, but others can't get there until once a month. So we're all working in the body of Christ there, and my devotion kind of overlaps into your devotion, into somebody else's devotion, and we're all just working together toward that. And I think even if just one time we say, okay, God, this one's for the conversion of sinners, or this one's for all those who are suffering, then it just all works beautifully. It's the body of Christ, and we're all communicating with each other at some point.
Well, this has been such a great discussion, Mary Ellen. We just really want to thank you for your honesty, for being available to us, for giving so much of your time.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been delightful talking to y'all.
Thank you.
Likewise.
Well, friends, thank you so much for being with us today. It's been an enjoyable discussion, and we'll hope you'll join us for the next one.
To continue supporting Shalom World, please go to www.shalomworld.org/donate.
And don't forget to follow us on Facebook or email your questions and comments to womanbe@shalomworld.org.